and Managing Director at Mirror Health, Bangalore Hospital, and Secretary, the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, SMSFM, Executive Editor of the Pan Asian Journal of Obs and Gynecology, and elected as Executive Committee member of BSOG, Organizing Secretary, Live Conference in 2019 for Bangalore, and affiliations, BSOG, Life member, and member of ISOM, ISSHP, IMA, and founder member of Justices, Indian chapter. And she has won several awards, Yuva Foxy, Dr. Kamini Rao Orator, and Yuva Foxy All-Rounder 2016, Certificate of Excellence in the category of Research and Young Scientist at the second Academic Brand Awards, New Delhi, and publications, several scientific publications in textbooks and journals, both in national conferences, and special interests, hypertensive disorders in pregnancy with a particular interest in preeclampsia, presently pursuing research with the MFM, Chicago, on the clinical utility of biomarkers in utero fetal programming. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
And Dr. Anuj Joseph, Consultant and Medical Director, Trinity Healthcare Clinic, Electronic City, Visiting Consultant at Fetal Medicine, Aspire Fertility Center, HSR Layout, and there is Motherhood Hospital, Saraspur Road, and Narayan Multi-Speciality Hospital, HSR Layout. Executive Committee Member, SMFM, and special interest, first trimester annual aneuploid screening and prevention of high-risk pregnancy. Welcome, ma'am. And Dr. Sri Vidya. Dr. Sri Vidya is consultant at fetal medicine at Milan Fertility Center, Matrutva Hospital. She completed her MS from KLE University, Belgaum. She did her fellowship in fetal medicine at BSCC and fellowship in advanced gynec and obstetrics ultrasound in Mediscan, Chennai. Her area of interests are ultrasound in multiple pregnancy and fetal echocardiography. Welcome, ma'am. And Dr. Shivalila Desai, DM neonatologist, PGI Chandigarh, coordinator and consultant neonatologist, Bhagwan Mahavir Jain Hospital at Bangalore. And Dr. Rajanish Samal is a senior consultant and obstetrician at Baptist Hospital, Bangalore, a graduate and postgraduate from CMC Vellore. He has worked in several rural mission hospitals through his career in states of Odisha, Chhattisgarh, and Himachal Pradesh, and his interest is in high-risk obstetrics. And he's a faculty for healthcare communication and is a chapter author on breaking bad news in the book Communicate Care Unit, Care Cure. Sorry. Welcome, sir. And Dr. Sunita B. Dr. Sunita has done an undergraduate degree from Bangalore Medical College, and she has completed DGO from MS Ramaiah Medical College, holds a diploma degree of the National Board in Obs and Gynec, and fellowship in feto-maternal medicine from BACC. She is the feto-maternal consultant at Milan with keen interest on managing high-risk ART conceptions and women with RPL. And she is the EC member of SMFM and BSOG. Dr. Hemavati Srinivasan, specialist in high-risk obstetrics and pregnancy at Milan. She has over 11 years of experience, received her DNB from Jain Hospital, Bangalore, and has completed her fellowship in feto-maternal medicine from Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences, Bangalore, and a member of FOXY and BSOG. So welcome all panelists. So over to Dr. Prakash sir to take the proceedings further.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be in this meeting, and we are really thankful to Shield for arranging this, and to ANBAI. ANBAI is the Association of the National Board Accredited Institutions of the state of Karnataka, with Dr. Makar as the chairperson and Dr. Padmaja as the secretary, and it has been nice to work with them. This is the second program actually we are having with them. Just for those who do not know, the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine of India is a registered body of high-risk pregnancy specialists from all over the country. We just started only about 2 years back, And now we are in a stage when we are going to take off with various chapters all over India. And our endeavor has always been to have some topic in high-risk pregnancy so that there could be the knowledge of high-risk pregnancy spreads across our country, because in India we have very diverse situations from small places to really state-of-art institutions. So we are trying to bring in the concept that, you know, how much ever you manage at your place. If you cannot, please forward it to the nearest tertiary center. So with this, once we our various chapters come, I take this opportunity to invite all of the audience over here to join any of the chapters in their local city, so that we spread this knowledge of high-risk pregnancy throughout the country. Maternal fetal medicine is a very new concept as far as India is concerned, but in a country like US, it has been existing for more than nearly 30 years now. It is only now, from the last 4-5 years, that people have started realizing that maternal fetal medicine is a subspecialty by itself. So with these few words, I take this opportunity to welcome everybody. And I must say here that we have a bright set of panelists who will enlighten all of us about what obesity and pregnancy is about. Yeah, with this, I hand over the mic to Dr. Marker to talk on behalf of ANBI. Muted, sir.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Marker. I'm the medical director of Bhagwan Mahavir Jain Hospital at Bangalore. And I also function as the president of ANBI, Karnataka State. Now, it gives me great pleasure to be associated with the Society of Maternal and Fetal Medicine India, as well as with Shield Healthcare Private Limited, in hosting this webinar on obesity and pregnancy. As you all have just heard the speaker from Shield, who has introduced all the speakers and the panelists to you, you have a very enlightened panel and extremely experienced and well-qualified consultants in the field of maternal and fetal medicine to be talking to you this afternoon about obesity and pregnancy. And I'm sure that at the end of this session, you will go back a much learned person. As you are aware, the Maternal and Fetal Medicine Society of India has been having these programs regularly, and ANBI has been fortunate to be associated with these programs, as we would like all our postgraduate students in the state of Karnataka to be exposed to such talks, to be exposed to such presentations. And I hope that in future we will continue to have our association with this society to increase aware of the problems that are faced by our patients, especially in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities, and how they can look after their patients. Now, since you have got such an enlightened panel awaiting you, I would not like to stand between you and the panelists. So I would request the panelists to please start their deliberations, and I wish this webinar all success and great goings ahead. Thank you and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Dr. Marker. And without much ado, we start with our panel. All right, now this panel is on obesity in pregnancy. We have a panelist, I told you, of high-risk pregnancy, of neonatologist, so that to answer all our questions on what happens during pregnancy, what can go wrong with the fetus, what is going to happen to the neonate that is born, and what will happen to this patient after she has delivered. And if she doesn't want any more children, how are we going to look after her contraceptive needs? So we start with this first question, and I think this should go to Dr. Revati.
Yes.
We are in a developing country. We have a large amount of undernourished population. We talk of anemia all the time. Now, why are we even talking of obesity? What is it that obesity has suddenly become so important?
So this we will have to go back to in utero fetal programming. Sir. What I felt was most of these patients who are obese now were not programmed very well when they were in their mother's womb. So these people are not able, they are not programmed to handle endocrine problems like insulin resistance. They are more prone to endothelial dysfunction. They are more prone to bad functioning the adipocytes, which can actually release adipokines. And so what happens as a result of all this is there is a lot of this epidemic of obesity which has actually come in the rise because these people are not programmed well in the uterus. So it's not about the nourishment which has actually caused them. It's about the thin fat hypothesis, which is actually pretty common in India,
Absolutely.
where the person is thin, but he has a lot of subcutaneous fat and very ill programmed and is very prone to endothelial dysfunction and insulin resistance. So that's the kind of people that we see in India.
Now, India being an upwardly mobile country, a lot of increase in obesity has been seen over the period of years. We know that we are one of the largest population having obese patients now, because our numbers are huge. So even if it's a small percentage, the total number of obese pregnancies are likely to be much more than in any other country. And this epidemic is not going to stop here.
And sir, and one more thing that I would want to add on is the change in lifestyle. I mean, we are no way different from the Westerners nowadays. People are less ambulant, and people are, even the people from the lowest socio-economic class are not laboring. They are most of the time sedentary workers. So all this is complicating the whole thing. And in fact, some of the studies in South India have shown that people are very few people are seen less than 25 BMI. So most of them are about 25. We don't see them as normal BMI people at all, in spite of their other nutrition issues.
See, the statistics from the National Family Health Survey says that 30 million people of India are affected with morbid obesity. 30 million. And what is more important is it is shocking that 75% of the Indian women are facing morbid obesity problems. Okay, so some of the obesity seems to have affected women more than the men, and that is why we are going to see more and more pregnancies in this obese population. Now, the important points about this is it is multifactorial, not necessarily due to one thing. We are quite a bit of Indian population were IUGR when they were in utero.
Correct.
They have gone through a stage of famine, and now suddenly they are getting a lot more food. So obviously obesity is going to come in, and obesity is something that is measurable. And the third important point is longitudinal. That means it is not one generational obesity. If you are obese today, you are passing on that obesity to a lot more generations. And it is preventable. That is the most important part of it. That is why we need to concentrate more and more on it.
Sir, I think we should also highlight about in utero fetal programming and development.
Yeah, that will be coming down the road when we come to the fetus. We will be talking about it. Now, why do you think this incidence is likely to increase? We have not seen the end of obesity in India. It is going to keep on increasing, multiplying.
Because predominantly previously we were having a farming community in India who were laborers mostly, but now the jobs have got better. There are better blue collared or white collared jobs wherein people are mostly sedentary throughout their work life, and they have to additionally do exercises if they want to maintain themselves.
Absolutely. Pressure. Habits have gone totally wrong.
Yes.
They become the norm. And look at this particular picture. Look at this particular picture. It's showing as if one of the fast food thing is the best that you could have. They have compared it equivalent to a breast milk. So when we are starting to get these kind of advertisements which are going to affect our youngsters more and more, obesity is going to increase. Okay, with this we go to this patient. This was one of our patients who came to me exactly the way that we are presenting. She was a 31-year-old lady, presented for the first time to me with secondary infertility. Her pre-pregnancy weight was 115 kgs, height was 162 centimeters, so her BMI was 43.8 kgs per meter square. Definitely much above the touted level of 35. Now, this goes to our panelists. I think Anu or anybody could answer. Is infertility common in obese patients?
Yes, infertility is quite common in obese patients. They would also come up with other kind of endocrinological issues like thyroid issues, PCOD, and things like that as well, which will add on obesity, and not just as a single factor, but will add on with thyroid disorders, with hypertension, with diabetes, with PCOD, which all probably ends up having a issue in causing infertility.
Okay, any supposing, let us say, for example, they're not able to conceive and I have to put her through an ART. Are there any special problems with ART in these patients as compared to a non-obese population?
Sir,
Is it possible?
Yes, sir. Two major issues. One is dosing. So the dosages of medicines are generally considered a little higher in most of the medicines work in per kg body weight. Beyond that, some of the infertility treatment, like an IVF, for instance, may put them at a higher risk for issues like DVT and immobility, again causing issues like that. So those definitely would be at a higher risk. The obese women would be at a higher risk when they are going through hormonal treatment for infertility.
and the other thing,
Absolutely. So as Anu rightly pointed out, they have a high prevalence of PCOS. So there is a negative impact on the infertility treatment because of the obesity itself. And even if they get pregnant, a miscarriage after infertility treatment is much more commoner in this population as compared to a routine population. And the third important point is that recurrent spontaneous abortions are more common with obesity.
so one more point I would want to add on, they also have this tendency to produce adipokines, which are inflammatory cytokines.
Absolutely.
So the inflammatory responses in these women are exaggerated, sir. So they are prone to autoimmune problems like endometriosis. So PCOS and endometriosis is a very bad combination for fertility. And so most of these patients have subfertility issues. So you will have to
Absolutely.
tackle
Now,
autoimmunity.
I think Revati has brought up a new concept, which has been now accepted for many years, is that fat is not just a storage tissue. Fat cells, the adipocytes, are endocrine systems in themselves.
Yeah.
And they affect the endocrine, the other endocrine organs also. And that is why we have more and more problems, and we are understanding more and more problems that an obesity could cause. Some of the seniors over here, if they are present, you would remember that when we were learning anatomy, we were just told that fat is a storage tissue. Now that concept is definitely no longer true. Okay, now as far as assisted reproduction is concerned, most of the points have been brought out, but there is an impaired oocyte quality. Fewer oocytes could be collected at every cycle, lower implantation rates, lower pregnancy rates, and higher preclinical miscarriage rates. There's more biochemical pregnancies in this patient as compared to non-obese. Now I think we will go over to who again Anu only is husband's obesity important? Because
Yes,
we've been talking about an obese woman so far. Is husband's obesity also important?
yes. Similar to the oocyte quality, the sperm quality also is found to be quite bad in men who are obese. Added on with other endocrinologic problem they can have. Also, erectile and ejaculatory dysfunctions are more common in obese men than in a healthy man.
Absolutely. So paternal obesity can play a role in adverse perinatal outcomes.
Yes.
And obese women are more likely to partner with obese men. I don't know, all of those, if you manage the obese patients, you know, most of the time, an obese woman is married to an obese man rather than to a very thin man. Not that it can't occur, it does occur. I've had 150 kg women married to a 50 kg man. That also happens. But most of the time, it is obese plus obese. And the effect of maternal and paternal obesity may be additive. And of course, obese men are more likely to be subfertile with compromised sperm quantity and quality. And also, they are more likely to suffer from an erectile dysfunction. So all these factors add on to both infertility, add on to pregnancy losses, and also add on to perinatal outcome. The lesson for us to learn is that whenever you are managing an obese woman, please ensure that you call in the husband also and use this opportunity to give a lifestyle modification advice to the couple as a total. Now, what care and counseling have to be provided to any patient who is obese? I'm just talking when they come to you for a pre-pregnancy period, she has still not got pregnant. And what care and counseling will you give it to her? And are any nutrient replacements required for this particular patient even at this stage?
Yes, sir. Multiple actually. In terms of counseling to be provided, we have to tell them what are the negative effects that obesity can have in terms of fertility, in terms of the entire pregnancy period and the delivery duration, and probably even beyond that, the complications that can happen to the mother and the baby. More importantly, they should also be counseled that if they reduce their weight, that itself takes them away from some amount of subfertility and the possibility of a natural conception and possibility of going through the entire pregnancy in a natural way without any other issues. Coming to the nutrient, the NICE guidelines says that 5 milligram folic acid mandatorily to be given to all obese women prenatally at least 1 month, and best possible is 3 months before they try to conceive.
So one more thing is most of these women, when actually they approach to you in an antenatal clinic, it's so difficult to get people preconception. But nowadays we are getting a lot of these couples who come to meet you, and if you see a woman,
so quite a few, just like my patient has come, quite a few come with infertility to us.
And most of these
so we should utilize this for causing a preconception care also.
Correct. And most of these patients, no sir, when you tell them that they are like 100 kg plus, and if they are ideal BMI, if they have to get to their ideal BMI, they have to reduce something like 40 kgs, and it may not be possible. But the best way to tell them is lose whatever is possible. So even if you want to lose 5 kgs, it's going to make a huge difference in both conception as well as pregnancy management. So I think you will have to tell them that you are not going to help them for conception unless they show some signs of losing weight, which can definitely make a huge difference to both the fertility as well.
So this is what Dr. Revati was trying to stress on. Weight loss improves pregnancy outcomes, and the weight loss in the pre-pregnancy period also reduces the risk of GDM or the gestational diabetes. Okay. Now, randomized trial of the Health Hunters Obesity Prevention Program targeted at-risk women between 18 to 28. And they were supported with diet and exercise, and it improved both the weight and the fitness. So we need to take care about that. And as far as the nutrients are concerned, yes, our panelists already brought this point out that there should be adequate level of folic acid. And whether of the neural tube defects that are seen in this obese women during pregnancy, are they related to folic acid level? We are still not too sure, but that is something that we can give it to them. And also, vitamin D needs to be supplemented in most of these women. Now we know that vitamin D causes infertility. We know vitamin D causes repeated abortion. We know vitamin D can be responsible for preeclampsia and so on and so forth. So use this opportunity to replace vitamin D if they require.
So there has also been this question as to what is the ideal folic acid, because you're not really happy. Most of the guidelines in the Caucasian say it's 5 milligrams. But we do have some Chinese studies, some Southeast Asian, though those numbers are not great. They found that the folic acid levels must be higher. Maybe they will require something like 800 micrograms, because most of these patients, if they conceive as multiple pregnancies, because of the bigger body surface area, the absorption can be affected. And this could actually contribute to anomalous babies. But still, we don't have guidelines. We're just following this 5 milligrams concept. So I think we will have to question this actually, because the incidence of anomalies is pretty high in this population.
Now, what are the important factors in the preconception care? What all you will do for this patient, apart from, let us say, giving folic acid and vitamin D? I think, can we go over to or Srividya? Or Anu can answer this.
So
what all you do when a patient comes to you with this kind of a problem?
Yes, sir. So first and foremost is yes, to tell them about the weight, and if possible they reduce it, put them across to a nutritionist who can help them in telling them what to eat, what not to eat. Start with preconceptional vitamins, like we have already discussed, folic acid, vitamin D. Assess them for other issues, assess them for diabetes, assess them for hypertension, assess them for hypothyroid, PCOD, and things like that. Definitely make a note on the family history in terms of what they are probably a little more prone to. And if they are morbidly obese, unable to have weight loss because of any of these things, then to counsel about surgical modes of weight reduction and things like that, which may be a last step. They would have gone through 3, 4, 5, 6 months of counseling, in spite of it nothing working, then probably into the other modes available for weight loss.
Okay, we also should counsel them at this time that your pregnancy is not going to be normal. They need to know the maternal risk, they need to know the fetal risk, they need to know the type of delivery, which most often is going to be a C-section, and that could be a problem with fetal monitoring issues. All this should be warned to the patient in the preconception period. But what is most important is that this is a modifiable risk factor, and this should be addressed in the preconception care. And try to take, as Revati pointed out, it could be 2 kgs, it could be 3 kgs, it could be 4 kgs. We're not expecting her to lose 20, 25 kgs, which is not going to be possible. But even 2, 3, 5 kgs.
So in fact, some of the studies have shown that if you take the delta, as in the actual weight by minus the weight, the preferred weight, and at least reduce it by 25%. In that itself shows a huge change in fertility and the way the pregnancy goes forward.
Most importantly, sir, we will have to take both the partners into account, because it's very, very important that both of them understand the risks that are involved, and tell them it's not going to be a tardy process. It could be even, a very, very spontaneous and a natural conception, but that does not guarantee that it is not going to be under surveillance. They are going to be 200% under surveillance, because every trimester requires a lot of anticipation and surveillance to identify what are the critical problems that these people are going to get in. So it's very important that they have to come for regular antenatal visits, which could be more than the usual.
Yeah, so this is our patient who was 31 years old with secondary infertility. I'd advised the weight loss. She lost about 5 kgs in 6 months, for which actually I was very thankful to her, because 5 kgs also made a lot of difference in her body habitus. Ovulation induction with clomiphene citrate was done. There was no result. However, 2 months later, she came back to me with a spontaneous pregnancy. Now, the next question would, where should the care be provided for this patient? Now, she has got pregnant. Where should I provide this care? Can I provide it in a smaller place? Should we be doing it in a, let us say, you have a patient with a BMI of 45. Can I manage her in a smaller place without much facilities? Or should we look at her in toto and have it in a little bit of a higher center?
So I think it should always be a collaborative effort. If you're looking at morbidly obese patients, may be difficult because the patient may not be able to enter into conventional places. You need to have different kinds of OPDs, wards to accompany these patients. And sometimes in case you have a patient who suddenly drops down in the OPD, you should have adequate number of stretchers, good wheelchairs to be able to shift them. But in our country, most of these patients are, usually between the BMI of 30 and say 40, and these patients are mobile. So in these situations, I feel they can be handled in clinics, but the thing is they need to be collaborated with bigger centers, because you must know exactly where you will take them. Suppose there is an emergency admission, or there is a team that works in an emergency. Absolutely. And you should
mild obesity we can manage anywhere, but supposing their BMI is more than, preferably more than 40 or at least above 45, then she definitely needs to be in a center where everything is available. Absolutely. And I would also advise that the anesthetist is a burly anesthetist like my anesthesiologist, so that they can handle that patient properly and hold the patient and make sure that that 130 kg woman is handled by that, rather than one teeny tiny anesthesiologist. And of course, you need to have both the ICU and NICU available to you, because you do not know when these patients could land up with problems. With that, we come to the next question. What are the problems expected during pregnancy? I know Dr. Shivleela is with us on the panel, but I'll be involving her once we reach the late fetal stage. Dr. Shivlila is a neonatologist, so not much role in so far discussion, but we'll involve her when we come to the late fetus and neonatology.
The problems are here in this obese woman would be the first trimester. There is an increased risk of miscarriage, which we can expect, and always a risk of diabetes, GDM, and the risk of PIH as she crosses the early second trimester. And also we have to think about the anomalies related to the anomalies, complications, and also this ultrasound related complication where we have difficulty to see them, see the fetuses more clearly to give them. And coming into the intrapartum care also, they have increased risk of prolonged labor and increased risk of cesarean delivery due to the maternal comorbidities associated. And also the postpartum complications like wound infections would be there, and a delayed onset of breastfeeding, and woman has to be encouraged to maintain it. So these are all the complications which we can expect during the various trimesters.
Absolutely. Again, what is more important to notice is right from antepartum to postpartum, there could be problems. And not to forget the long-term problems, including malignancy, osteoarthritis, type 2 diabetes, chronic hypertension, and heart disease. And of course, the fetus also goes through a lot of problems. And more important, like I think Dr. Revati was already talking about it, long-term obesity, diabetes, hypertension in this fetus who is born of this obese mother. Now, what is important to note here is the chance of a death of a pregnant obese woman is double the risk of a thin woman. Now, with this, we come to a little funny question. What are the technical issues expected in managing this patient? See, why did I bring in a question of appropriate center? Because there are a lot of technical issues involved in managing this obese patient. What are all the technical issues, Dr. Revati?
Sir, this is a very, very important question actually, because some of these patients who are, I had a woman who was, of a BMI of 44. Luckily, she was young and she was moving, but when I actually went to Maternal Fetal Medicine Chicago, I actually saw a woman who was 327 kgs, and that was like shocking. But they were so very well equipped, sir. You need to have the corresponding stretchers, you need to have wheelchairs. They had a separate OT for the obese women, and they had more number of surgeons, more number of anesthesiologists, more number of nurses, the blood products, everything. There was a protocol to treat obese women because there were these black women who were really, I mean, their average weight used to be something like more than 100 kg plus. And had to handle a multiple pregnancy in these women. There could be technical problems operating in these women. There were separate nurses to actually get the fat up, sir. I mean, to retract the fat up when you were actually going to operate on these women. So I think there are a lot of these issues because you can't put them on a stretcher. They're just going to stay, a term.
The stretcher will break. I've had one of my OT tables initially, breaking into two the moment you put the patient on the table.
And I was astonished to see that they had regular OT tables which can fit in 500 kg women. I mean, that was like something more than 700 pounds. I mean, so you need to be equipped. But I don't think we will see such kind of patients in India. But still, I think considering that more than 100 kg women have to be handled a little seriously, we must have our OT infrastructure well planned. We should have something that does not break even at 200 kgs. We should have good number of nurses. We should have good number of anesthesiologists, good number of surgeons, to handle if something can happen. It's more of anticipation.
And to add to whatever Revati was telling, it is very difficult to palpate this patient. The assessment of growth, the line, the presentation
everything is
going to be
ultrasound.
very difficult. Patient will not be able to feel fetal movements quite often. Our blood pressure equipment is not going to fit her.
Yes, and the CTG.
By this particular patient, I had to get a special cup for her because our regular PP cup that was there in my labor room was not fitting her at all. We just couldn't, strap it across. The Velcro used to be far away when we were trying to measure the blood pressure for her. Vascular access is very, very difficult. And if you give them you start a IV line, let us say somehow you get a peripheral line. By the time she's shifted and she's put on the table in the postoperative period, you will lose off that vascular access. So possibly there might be a role of central line insertion in this patient. And as Revati told, theatre beds, trolleys, staff, all are important. We'll be coming a little more to ultrasonography. I think we have got Sri Vidya with us. She will be able to tell us more about ultrasonography in these patients. And
Yes.
monitoring during labor is extremely difficult. You try to do a CTG on this
CTG.
patient, you will realize how difficult it is to do a CTG, uh, and so on and so forth. Yes, Sri Vidya, can you tell us something about doing an ultrasound scan in a patient with who's so obese?
Yeah, coming to this exact ultrasound picture which sir has displayed, we can see the abdominal thickness from the probe. It's like more than 6-7 centimeter depth. So as the ultrasound beam passes through the depth, the energy, ultrasound energy gets absorbed by this adipose tissue. So the fetus receiving the ultrasound energy is so less that that's why we get this blurred image, or will not be able to see these fetuses very clearly. So as we come in the first trimester, especially to see a small baby as small as like 4-5 centimeter during our NT, it's very difficult for us. So many a time we may get an erroneous report of NT, and again that impacting on her first trimester screening being erroneous. The second is, as we go to the mid trimester, we have a lot of difficulty to measure the fetus biometry wise and also see the structural abnormality. And as such, these obese women are more prone for especially the neural tube defect and also the cardiac cleft and also the anorectal abnormalities. So when we know that these are more prone for malformation, and still the visibility becomes a major challenge. So before issuing a report, we should make sure that the patient is well informed about the limitations what we have. So this is even with the best ultrasound machine and the best equipment, we still have not been able to completely overcome this obesity issues. So as the baby grows up, again in the second and third trimester, we have an issue. So either it could be the bigger baby or it could be a smaller baby. So it could be majority of the time small for gestational age, or with the mothers having a comorbidities like preeclampsia and also diabetes mellitus, and a mother being a obese, in turn affecting the neurodevelopment of the baby fetus also, and changing the metabolic fetal signals also, leading to macrosomia. So we have to follow up these fetuses especially every 4 to 6 weeks, and compared to the general women who have a lesser BMI, these women require more ultrasound, because we cannot monitor the fetal growth restriction only on the symphysiofundal height. So these are the major things which we have to go about as we go ahead with the pregnancy with the ultrasound.
Absolutely. The most important thing you need to inform the couple is that your ultrasound examination is going to be suboptimal, and there is a
Absolutely.
chance that the defects could be missed.
Yes.
That has to be told. And look at the second picture. This is a picture of amniocentesis. You can see the needle tip here, right within the amniotic fluid. But look at the needle shaft. You can hardly see anything where you're going. So doing an amnio in this, because these are the patients who are more likely to come with many markers. These
Major.
are the patients who are going to be a wee bit elderly. These are the patients who are going to be diabetic. These are the patients who are more prone for chromosomal and genetic abnormalities. And to do an amniocentesis in them becomes difficult. There have been times when we have had to use the long needles, not the regular spinal needles, what we
Finally,
use for most
yeah,
of the time for
we just
amnio,
use a longer needle.
are not enough. You have to use long needles. And the biggest problem when you use a long needle is that you cannot
Yes.
manipulate the needle through this fat very easily. The direction, because they're very thin, 22 gauge needle. So the direction changes. The needle refuses to obey
Sure.
the direction that you want it to go. So these are the kind of difficulties that you face with an obese patient. Now, are there any minimum interventions required? I think Srividya brought out a few. What other interventions would you want in this patient? Is just a recapitulation of what all we have told so far. Revati?
Yes, sir. Like starting from the preconceptional point, right? I mean, you're talking about.
No, in the pregnancy. Now the patient has become pregnant. We are in
Okay.
pregnancy.
So, what are the things additionally that you would want to do in an obese woman?
Absolutely.
So, in
Minimum
the
investigations that you have to do.
Yes, sir. So in the first trimester, we will have to look at her sugars very seriously. I mean, I don't really wait for a GTT, sir, because most of these patients have a fasting hyperglycemia, and they also really come with a very high HbA1c. There is no time for me to actually wait for a GGT 75 grams 2-hour value. But if you're looking
So
at a
you should do a
conventional
GDM screen as soon as they come.
absolutely.
It may be 5 weeks,
Absolutely.
6 weeks, 7 weeks, whatever it
Absolutely.
is.
Look at their hemoglobins. Not necessarily all these obese women are going to be good with their hemoglobins. Look at their hemoglobins. And it's also important to look at their thyroids, because most of these patients are going to be hypothyroid. And if they are going to be fertility conceptions, they're going to have other associated autoantibodies also being associated with it, which is going to make her TSH, high. So that is something. So we are necessarily going to look at a CBC. We're going to look at TSH. We're going to look at blood sugar screen. We're going to do a urine test, because most of these patients have predisposition for ascending infections. Even periconceptually, they have this exaggerated pelvic inflammatory disease and those kinds of things. So I would definitely do a vaginal swab and also look at a urine routine and urine culture, because most of these patients are asymptomatic. So you can pick up an infection and you can treat them, and that there is a guideline, a ACOG guideline of 2017, which says that treating first trimester ascending infections can go a long way to prevent preterm births. So that's something that I want to do. And apart from that, I would not actually dissociate the blood investigations from the ultrasound, because I think both of them should go hand in hand. Very, very important that we do a viability check in them. It's not that we wait only up to the 14 weeks, because very, very important, because these are going to have thrombotic factors. So establish viability, do a viability scan, do a dating scan, which is usually between 8 to 10 weeks. Would want to do an NT. Shilvia has already told us that there are going to be several limitations, but we are going to step up with additionally doing the double markers and things like that, so that we have a better kind of prediction for aneuploidy. And we also know that the incidence of having structural defects are going to be high. So we are going to look at morphology whenever it is possible, whether at the 12 to 14 weeks or maybe even mid-trimester. Then we would definitely want them to have an anomaly scan. Apart from that, in the second, the frequency of visits in the second trimester, I would say 2 weeks, because we don't know exactly how these people are going to behave. Look at their BPs every visit. Look at their, introduce them for blood sugar monitoring, home glucose monitoring, home BP monitoring, or everything is allowed. Look at them more frequently and repeat all the tests. I would want to repeat a CBC again, looking at their CBCs. And if
every trimester we need to repeat.
Every trimester, look at their cultures. And once they reach 24 weeks, because they would have gone through a lot of these things, most of them would have actually been treated for chronic hypertension, or just the possibility of having superimposed preeclampsia and things like that are going to be very high. I would look at them weekly, sir, because I would want to work on an anticipatory models. Maybe it is not possible in a small setup, but I would rather call them more frequently rather than not calling them and ending up in a critical problem. So I would see them every week. I would assess. I would never go. I would not do a symphysiofundal height. Obviously, I can't palpate them. So I would do a well-being check at least once in 2 weeks. Look at their growth once in 3 weeks, and monitor them for hypertension and worsening sugars. And what is very important to understand is hyperglycemia may not necessarily mean worse. Only worse levels can lead to macrosomia. In fact, subtle changes in values of blood glucose can have an impact on both polyhydramnios and macrosomia. So very, very important that you keep a check of this after 28 weeks.
Basically, your opinion on use of metformin.
Sir,
can I use metformin throughout the pregnancy for keeping her weight down? Is it advisable?
Sir, in my, there have been a lot of guidelines which say that metformin is a very good tool, and this is more from the fertility perspective, but from a maternal fetal medicine perspective, I would rather switch to having one drug, sir. It's very difficult. When you actually titrate metformin and insulin, their pharmacokinetics are so difficult, sir. You can't put them onto an endocrinologist and say, he will manage insulin and I will manage metformin. The patient is a single entity. Maybe they can get them pregnant with metformin, but if I'm actually looking at a patient who is diabetic, I would rather use insulin, because it's very easy for me. Even treating hyperglycemia with insulins, I've really not had them put on great weights. They say that metformin can get their weights down. I've had excellent results when their glucose is, when their glycemic control is good with insulins. And it is very difficult because most of these patients will go into hypoglycemia actually at wrong times if you're giving 2 or 3 kinds of medications. So
we need to look at 2 things very clearly. One is diabetes and another one is hypertension, because as the pregnancy advances, these are going to come. But at the same time, we should not miss about the psychiatric problems in these patients. It's our duty to give them a psychiatric support also. Why are psychiatric problems more common in these patients?
These patients are already not very comfortable with their body image. Actually, they're not so confident when they come to a checkup, and they're also body shamed because most of them say
the depression is very common in them.
And they,
so we need to look at the depression and make sure that they are not really truly depressed. Yes. And somewhere along the way, we need to keep on giving them a moral support. Say, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry, and keep on doing things.
So, and most importantly, I think we should introduce them. Like we should have our own support groups, where you can
Absolutely.
have an obese woman talk to another obese woman who's actually delivered, and she would actually reinforce a lot of confidence in this woman. And this is something that we have to learn to do in the long run, sir. Otherwise, these women are going to be very difficult to be managed.
Absolutely fine. Absolutely. What would be the ideal weight gain during pregnancy, Anu?
So ideal weight gain
during pregnancy in this
so it is told, I mean, for a healthy, normal adult woman, it is told to be about 10 to 12 kilograms entire pregnancy, which we can also explain to them after the first trimester, 1 kg per month. But in a already obese woman, I would tell them that throughout pregnancy, if there is a possibility to their diet and exercise, they can maintain at the same weight. That would be the best thing that they can do.
Absolutely. So we have got IOM guidelines that have come in that for an overweight woman, you try to stick to 7 kgs. Don't allow them to go more than 6 or 7 kgs throughout the pregnancy. I know it's a very tall order, very difficult to do, but my patient, I could do it for about 10 kgs. We took her up to. But the ideal would have been 5 to 7 kgs. Whereas if the BMI is above 40, BMI is above 40, then you need to think in terms of whether would you be able to make them lose some weight during the pregnancy rather than putting on. So that is an important point, but most of our patients are likely to be between 35 and 40. So 0 to 5 kgs would be the most ideal one.
Sir, and the other thing that I want to highlight is most of these patients who come to you pregnant and they are more than 40, their endocrine problems are not properly handled. The moment you start treating their hypothyroidism, the moment you start their hyperglycemia, no, sir, they will lose weight. That is where you get the advantage. So you make up the 3 kg so they don't really gain that kind of weight if they are going to be under surveillance.
Absolutely. And we know that depression leads to overeating.
Absolutely.
So even that, if you correct it, possibly the patient will not put on that kind of a bad weight. What are the antepartum risks? We have talked about it already, but let us just go through quickly to complete antepartum risks.
First trimester miscarriages, very, very common. Yeah. And they can turn gestational diabetic, they can turn, they can be chronic hypertensive who are unraveled during pregnancy because these are going to be PCO and obese. They're going to have endocrine problems like hypothyroidism. And in the second trimester, the incidence of having anomalies is pretty high. And they are at great risk for preeclampsia. I mean, this is something that can happen out of nowhere. They're starting from, say, 20 weeks and above. I would say they would straight go to preeclampsia without anything in between. And having gestational diabetes and macrosomia, very, very common. Having, worsening infections leading to preterm delivery. They are prone to, endothelial dysfunction and growth restriction. They are prone to stillborns. And incidentally, they say that the odds of abruption is not all that so greater in obese patients. It does not add on. Obesity does not add on to the risk of abruption. But the morbidities with which they come to, like they can be thrombotic, they can be diabetic, they can have endothelial dysfunction. This is what will add on to abruption.
Absolutely. What we should not forget is problems like cholelithiasis or the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is quite common in them. So if a patient comes to you with an acute abdomen or obese patient, keep cholelithiasis in mind. And another very important aspect is sleep apnea. Now we know that sleep apnea is a cause for hypoxia, cause for preeclampsia, cause for FGR, and so on. So we need to keep this in mind.
Sir, and the other thing with ART on the rise, most of these patients are going to be on progesterone. So that's going to worsen your cholelithiasis and things like that. So
absolutely.
You have to be
so
and very important.
Apnea, you must ask the patient every time they come whether she has got, how is her sleep? Is she getting disturbed? Does she have to get up because her hypoxia comes in and she's sleeping because of the apneas? And that can be very easily corrected. So we need to look into it.
Absolutely.
Okay, now I think I will involve Shiv Leela at this particular stage. What are the fetal problems that could occur? We have still not gone to neonatology, Dr. Shiv Leela, but fetal problems, and what are fetal defects more common? Which defects are common? Why are they common?
Okay. Well, when you guys have discussed so many problems associated with the mother, definitely the fetus is going to have problems. Okay. Now, the first thing what was told was the obese ladies, the eggs, they are not of the optimum quality. And added to that, if the father also is obese, the sperm also is a compromised quality sperm. So we are going to have a fetus who is compromised because of the maternal and the paternal obesity. Now, what are the problems? Sudden death of the fetus, stillbirths, that is very common in these babies. The cause most often than not could be because of the overnutrition is what is predicted, but it could be various. One of them could be even hyperglycemia, and which these ladies most often than not have it. Fetal defects, yes, neural tube defects are very common in these babies. If the obesity in the ladies who are obese, the incidence of neural tube defects, especially with morbid obesity, they say it's 3 to 5-fold increased in these pregnancies. We have disrupted growth patterns in these fetuses. At one end, we can have severe macrosomia. At the other end of the spectrum, we could have a lady having severe fetal growth restriction, secondary to various endothelial diseases, which these ladies are known to have. The incidence of low APGAR scores are very common in these babies. That is because of fetal hypoxia, which could be due to varied reasons. Birth injury, yes, because secondary to fetal macrosomia. We have these ladies who will, during a normal labor, these ladies tend to get exhausted very fast. They will not be able to push the baby, and we might have a prolonged second stage of labor causing fetal hypoxia in the baby. Birth injuries, the commonest which we can see in these is shoulder dystocia leading on to the nerve injuries. Of course, there could be any type of birth injuries which could occur. Like I told you, fetal death rate, still death, birth is very common in these babies. The incidence of NICU admissions are very, very high in these babies, and I'm sure my obstetrician never likes his babies to go into the NICU. None of them would like it. But the incidence of NICU admissions and the cost effect because of the NICU admissions are going to be very high. Now, the fetus is very closely connected to the mother. So anything going wrong with the mother is reflected onto the baby. Maternal obesity has got a lot of problems associated with the vascular, with the endocrine, and with the cardiac problems. And these things are going to be reflected onto the developing fetus. There are some studies which have shown that the cord blood leptin levels have been very high. That means these babies are exposed to a lot of oxidative stress, which is very high in these babies. So it is like the baby per se, not a particular organ, the entire baby, entire fetus and the neonatal per se are placed at a lot of risks because of the maternal obesity. The Bacchus hypothesis, which was mainly looked at fetal growth restriction because of maternal undernutrition, has proved very well that these babies at a later age are known to have cardiac problems, hypertension, diabetes. But we have not considered the other spectra. That means if the undernutrition is going to affect the baby, overnutrition also can be equally disastrous for a developing fetus. It can change the neuroregulatory process in the baby, affect the hypothalamus, and make these babies very prone for obesity, for diabetes, heart hypertension as an adult. In fact, a lady who is obese, the chances of she having a baby who is large for date and subsequently obese is also very high. And by
True.
macrosomia, we don't mean that it's only the weight, it is the fat, body fat index, which is very high in these babies. The percentile of fat in these babies is going to be much more higher. It's going to be, if in a normal weight pregnancy, it's 9.7%. With BMI going to 30, it goes something like 11 to 13% and can go up drastically. So these babies are born with a fat load, which is huge. And that itself can dysregulate their metabolism and place them at risk even as an adult.
Absolutely. That means we are affecting this baby's adulthood also, and maybe this babies also we are affecting if we don't control the obesity well. Now,
yes,
the basic thing is the defects come in because of the defective methylation and the transcription goes fat. That is why we are not, that is why the defects come in. And a very important point, as Srividya has already pointed out, is that inability to diagnose anomalies. There is 37% of the time a suboptimal ultrasound scan. So there's a good chance that we can miss a defect in these patients, and this patient should never be counseled that we are 100% sure that the baby is fine. You can never do that. Okay, and another big worry.
Yeah. Another thing is, yes, we look for obvious abnormalities in the glucose tolerance test and then try to look for diabetes, gestational diabetes. But what is most scary is even subtle variations in the glucose. It can cause severe growth disruptive mechanisms in the growing fetus. So it's very important for us to be stringent with the dietary advice, what is going on to the mother. But even a little variation in the glucose can affect the baby, not only for now, but in future also.
Future also, true. And the biggest worry for us as far as fetal problems are concerned is that this folate that we give, Revati already brought this point up, quoting a Chinese study, is that folate doesn't protect the infant of obese women from NTD. So that's even if you give 5 milligram, the baby could still land up with a neural tube defect.
Because of the massive body surface area these ladies have, we are not too sure how much of the folate is actually
going to be absorbed, and how much of demethylation is really going to occur.
Yes,
and another very important factor that you need to bring out is the epigenetic changes. Epigenetic changes in obesity are very, very important.
They needn't follow the Mendelian
law. Like Shivlila already told us, dysregulation of the HP axis, dysregulation of neurotransmitters, dysregulation of immune system, and so on. Now we go back to Revati. Why are you can see this graph that even without a pre-existing first of all, the pre-existing chronic diseases are very high in obese women, but gestational hypertension is more common. Gestational diabetes is more common. Why are this PE and diabetes more common? Why?
It's because most of these patients have endothelial dysfunction. They are subject to oxidative stress. They have these adipokines, which can cause inflammation in the body. And this can actually affect all the organs in the body, starting from the blood vessel endothelium to, anything in the body can be affected. So they have increased risk of infections and all these kinds of things. So any oxidative stress, even a subtle oxidative stress, can predispose disease. Absolutely. So already these people have a predisposition for endothelial dysfunction. So the moment they get pregnant, they are more prone to having these kinds of the end result issues like preeclampsia, and they also have yes. So
the biggest culprit there is inflammation and free radicals. So these are somehow increased in these obese patients, leading on to all these problems. And the second slide shows what Dr. Shivlila was trying to tell us. The word that is used is wonderful. That's why I put this slide. Diabesity begets diabesity.
That's more of a
that means whether it's a diabetes or whether it's obesity or a combination of both, it passes on from generation to generation. So we need to really put a check on this particular phenomena. All right, so now we've moved further with our patients. She remained stable throughout. BP remained stable throughout. In spite of all my best efforts, the weight went up to 128 kgs. And in third trimester, her GRBS was 181 milligrams. So now we know that the diabetes has been added to it. She had several abdominal wall edema, uterus was term size, relaxed. I don't know how I called it term size, but it looked term size. And cervix was absolutely unfavorable. Scan wise, on 3rd of February, she was 34 weeks, corresponding to 34 weeks. So no technical macrosomia or no technical FGR. Weight was only about 2.4 kgs and CPR was greater than 1. So on the whole, it was quite a happy ultrasound that I could
The
get.
A5 was 21.
A5 was 21, yes.
It's polyhydramnios.
There was some amount of polyhydramnios. But then, you know, as long as about 25, okay. So the next question that comes is when and how to deliver her and what are the intrapartum problems expected? Anu, could you answer that? When and how to deliver and what are the intrapartum problems expected?
Yes, sir. So, the two things. One, with her diabetes, which is probably uncontrolled, there is a risk of sudden IUDs and issues like that. But since there is no technical FGR or macrosomia, I would definitely want to first control the diabetic status and, if possible, continue.
One question here, Anu. 125 kg woman and an 100 kg husband. If I'm getting a 2.4 kg baby, ultimately when I delivered this baby out, it looked like, you know, a palm size for her, although it was full term.
Yes. Sir, there are two problems now. So if we keep the baby inside, the risk of IUD is there. If we can continue the pregnancy till about 37 completed week, we can override the problems of prematurity. Because she is diabetic, already there will be an issue of RDS with the baby. Steroid her, keep her ready for delivery at any point of time. Now, inducing her or not depends on the disproportion, CPD, if at all any. We can induce her. There is no strict guideline saying that she has to go for a section. But that would be a trial of labor, minimum induction, not progressing directly for cesarean. Why I would favor normal delivery in her is because of the post-operative morbidities that she will have. The morbidities would be less in terms of normal delivery if she can go through it. But then, yes, if it goes in for a macrosomic baby because of the diabetes, then we would have issues with the birth trauma.
This is a patient with bad obstetric history, patient who has had repeated abortions. She has had a history of secondary infertility. With great difficulty, she has managed to conceive.
So that is why it will only be a trial of induction of labor. It would not be a full-fledged trial like how we would give it for any other patient. If the patient is okay about direct cesarean, I would definitely do that, provided the patient also understands that cesarean is not the easy way out. She can have anesthesia risk, she can have post-operative risk, including and not limited to infections in the post-operative period.
What problems can we expect with anesthesia? I don't know if Srividya would like to answer this or Revati will answer this. Problems with anesthesia.
So most of the times, regional anesthesia is what is actually preferred because these people cannot be easily intubated. Not that regional anesthesia is also going to be easy because putting them into a proper position itself is going to be very tough. And most of the time, what we've actually seen is usually an epidural cum spinal is what is actually preferred. And if you are probably having a laboring woman, always, you know, an epidural catheter would be the best thing that you can actually do. And most of the time they say that there are some lot of articles which say that these are protected from post-dural headaches and things like that. Obesity itself is protected, but I've seen a lot of these women because of multiple punctures having a lot of post-dural headaches postpartum. So this is something that we actually encounter. And all of these women are going to have some other issues. They're going to come to you with health. They're going to have all these things. So they're going to bleed when the needle is actually going to be inserted. And so what is actually preferred is a continuous spinal epidural kind of a situation. And what they feel is these people are not going to ambulate so quickly. So they're going to have a lot of pain because they're going to be sedentary post-operatively. So keep the catheter in. They say that you keep a catheter in, epidural catheter, thoracic catheter, so that there is some amount of pain relief, which is better than the usual analgesics that you actually give. So you should have epidural analgesia post-op also. And most important, and when you put the patient on the table, sir, they start gasping. So that is one major issue actually. So it is so important that you finish with your procedure as soon as possible. And when you actually, if you have to intubate these patients, very important that you have a video laryngoscope, because you may not really know where you're actually going in. Aspiration could be a very major risk.
True.
So I think these are the things that.
An important point with epidural is that do not tell the patient epidural may not be possible in you.
Yeah,
because our aim should be to go for epidural as far as possible.
Yes.
And one of the important thing is if you go to a higher space, don't stick to the level of L2, L3. Go a little bit higher, then the chance of a successful epidural is much better.
Yes.
Okay, and then if you are giving general anesthesia, please give her a good chest physiotherapy. Otherwise, she's going to have lined up with a lung collapse, and she's going to have a hypostatic pneumonia coming in. So, if we need to give her good chest physiotherapy, give her incentive spirometry so that she starts breathing very fast. And another important point in postpartum, again, avoid sleep apnea. Because sleep apneas are very, very common in these obese patients. Somehow in obstetrics, we have not concentrated so much on sleep apnea, but it's very important that we concentrate on it. So ultimately, I had to take her up for a C-section. We got a baby of 2.9 kg, a female baby, and the baby was absolutely fine. You can see the placental weight was about 590 grams, and the mother and the baby were quite thrilled with each other, I should say. How would you proceed with C-section? Is C-section very simple? Like I do my routine C-sections, can I do a C-section in this patient also?
No, sir. Starting with preparation, you have to prepare the anesthetic team that there is a possibility of, she having a difficult anesthesia. Telling the nursing staff that you may have to prepare, say, sometimes double coat. We have had issues where we have put 2 OT coats together to make the patient sleep down. Blood, fluid, all those things to be arranged freehand. You should have a senior assistant and one more additional assistant for retractions and things like that. Which
Tell your assistants to have good food and then come.
Yes, one of the very important thing. One of the very important.
It should not fall.
Pre-op antibiotic is going to be very important. Making sure that her otherwise diabetic and all these things are under control at the time of taking out at the time of cesarean. Cesarean steps might be the same, but it would be difficult in terms of assistance, in terms of visibility, and in terms of extraction of baby. Sir's Vectis method or a vacuum would be kept in handy for an easy extraction of the baby.
Absolutely. There are certain very important points that you need to keep in mind. One thing is the maternal positioning is very important because the operative time is going to be longer than for a routine cesarean section. So she shouldn't go in for a vena cava syndrome. Pannus retraction is again very important. Surgical tape. I generally use surgical tape, or we use the strap. We put in 4 Alices on the fat, put a tape and tell the anesthetist that most of the time you're sitting and reading a book or going through your WhatsApp. Don't do this for this particular case. Hold on to the straps properly so that the anesthetist literally helps us in retracting of the fat. Or there is, this is one thing, of course, I've never used it, but there is something called a Straxi that is available, which helps in the traction of the abdominal wall. The skin incision, where you put it is very important. Don't go under a fold, because if you go under a fold, then possibly the chance of infection are much more. So you need to go at a little bit of higher level. Between transverse and vertical incision, both have been found to be equally, I would use the word horrible, because both can get infected, both can cause problems. But a transverse incision at a higher level would definitely be much better. Subcutaneous tissues have to be closed when 2 centimeters or more of tissue is present, which is going to be the case in these patients. Drain, I prefer to put in the drains, but the literature says that no evidence that subcutaneous drains are going to help. But from my previous experiences where I have had a lot of seromas occurring in the wound, I prefer to put the drain because there is no harm in putting a subcut drain. At least you know what is happening, and quite often you will see that the subcut drains up to 100 to 150 ml per day. Imagine in 2 days, there would have been a 300 ml serosal collection of the serous fluid in the subcutaneous tissue. And these patients being diabetic, these patients being fat, the chance of infections are very, very high. But that is what the literature says, that don't put in a drain. I repeat again, I always put in a drain. And of course, for the wound, you can have what is called as a vacuum management, so that the wound healing is better. And between staple or suture, there is nothing much to choose. You can use staple or you can use sutures. Issues with birth weight, I think we have already covered. Since we are running short of time, I'll continue this. Okay, now we come back to Shivlila. Are perinatal, neonatal problems common? What problems occurs in neonatal period? Why do they occur?
Yes, we do face a lot of problems with these babies. The commonest neonatal problems what we face in these babies could be the incidence of birth asphyxia in these babies are high. Most of them are known to have low APGAR scores because of altered in utero environment. These babies, most of them, they do require NICU admissions, and the cost effect of NICU admission is going to be huge for these babies. Neonatal problems could be, in addition to birth asphyxia, a difficult delivery, which is very common, especially in the macrosomic babies, where you could have shoulder dystocia and brachial plexus injuries or fractures. It could be any variation of birth injuries related to macrosomia and difficult delivery for these babies. Like I told you, stillbirths are very high in these babies due to altered in utero environment because of the various reasons already discussed during the past 1 hour or so. In addition to macrosomia, these babies are born preterm mainly because of maternal obesity. For various reasons, that the pregnancy has to be terminated because of the maternal conditions, and we have to face a problem of preterm and all the problems associated with prematurity, be it birth asphyxia, be it respiratory distress syndrome, anything related to prematurity. The incidence of perinatal mortality is very high in these babies. Again, because of a harsh in utero environment and altered growth patterns, these babies are prone for increased risk of both mortality and morbidity. The other neonatal problems, especially with macrosomia and macrosomic babies and macrosomic and growth retarded babies, is their sugar regulation. We do have a lot of problem associated with hypo and hyperglycemia. Hypo with macrosomic babies and hyperglycemia with babies who are severely growth retarded. And the more preterm the baby, high is the risk of hyperglycemia. And this hyperglycemia can lead on to various morbidities. The dreaded one which we see could be intracranial bleed secondary to the increased osmolality of the blood what we have in these babies. These babies have also, there are some studies where they have told, though these are not proven, small scale studies which have told that these babies can have neurodevelopmental issues also. And the incidence of autistic spectra disorders could be higher in these babies, especially the ones who are born to obese mothers. Though the numbers are not great, but this is something what is being seen, that these babies can have neurodevelopmental disorders and autism, which again is related to the various in utero programming which these babies are exposed to during their fetal development. So disruption in their in utero environment place these babies at a very high risk, both long term and in the immediate neonatal period.
Absolutely true. Even cesarean delivery is not all that easy. imagine a mountain in front of you, and then with an oblique lie or a breach there, and when you try to put in your hand through that mountain of fat and try to get the baby out, it's not going to be easy at all.
Fractures are
Everything.
another thing what is very common when you have these issues.
True. Okay, so this part we have covered it already very well. We'll
Yes,
quickly go through this,
breastfeeding is
last
one more
slide.
thing. So, sorry,
Yeah.
Prakash. Breastfeeding is one more thing which could be really difficult in these ladies.
Yes.
Because of their morbid obesity, lactation is a problem, and getting into appropriate position and feeding itself could be a task for these ladies who find moving themselves a big problem.
True. You
So
need to give them
feeding
a lot
could
of
be another
lactation
issue
support.
in these ladies. No,
All right.
forget the support. Because of the morbid obesity, they get up and get into a proper position to feed the baby. So feeding most often than not is going to be a problem. Breastfeeding especially is going to be a problem in these ladies.
All right, with this we possibly come to the last question. We are running out of time, so please, I would request you to be very quick. What are the postpartum problems, Dr. Revati? And next to Dr. Anu, what contraceptive advice will you give her now? So we start with Dr. Revati, postpartum problems, a little quickly, please.
Yes, sir. They're not going to be ambulant, and they're very, very prone for thrombosis. So thromboprophylaxis is very, very important. So, and it has to be a weight-based thromboprophylaxis. Ideally, what we follow in an Indian setup is about 1 milligram per kg body weight. And if you have something like more than 40 milligrams, it's always better to give them as divided doses. So that is something that we have to give. And in fact, it's not a guideline as to how long you have to give, but I think it's worthwhile giving them for 6 weeks because they are prone to such kind of thromboembolic episodes up to 6 weeks. Then they hydrate them. Very, very important that they have to drink water a lot because that's also going to keep them protected. Breastfeeding is a major concern. Post-dural headache could be a little exaggerated in these patients. And they're going to have sepsis. So wound hygiene, very, very important. And you have to look at the wound after 24 hours, whatever. You can replaster it. You can again put in a dressing, but look at it and make sure that it is not oozy and make sure that they're covered. I would prefer to cover them with IV antibiotics for 5 days because that is something that, you know, would definitely keep them protected against superadded infections. Glycemic control postpartum also very, very important because that's going to worsen wound sepsis and breastfeeding issues. And sometimes these patients who have been autoimmune and obese and normotensive prior to delivery, I find these kinds of patients have an exaggerated inflammatory response postpartum and suddenly they develop conditions like PRES. So very, very important that you monitor their BPs even postpartum because sometimes their BPs can fluctuate and this can lead to some problems like PRES and CVT, which gets exaggerated in these patients.
Okay, Anu, what contraceptive advice will you give her?
So initially till her menses restarts and as long as she is on lactation, I would advise them to use a barrier contraception which will not have any side effects usually on them because added with subfertility and lactational amenorrhea method, barrier method would be more than enough for them. If they have completed the family along with the cesarean, I would ask them to go forward with the permanent sterilization method. If they've not decided at the time of cesarean or they have a vaginal delivery, I would counsel the husband for a permanent sterilization method. If they've not completed the family, then the advice would be based on what are their comorbidities. Usually combined
My patient has only one baby.
Yes, sir. So such
she would
people
definitely want one more baby.
Temporary methods. Condoms are the safest in terms of morbidities because they will not have side effects, but the added thing is that they will be always subfertile. So the percentage that they would not conceive on barrier methods will be higher.
It's quite high.
Yes.
Quite high, but we cannot afford to be complacent and we have to give them something.
Yes.
And we also know that OCPs are not very good for these patients.
Yes.
Progesterone only combinations are progesterone only.
What about IUCD?
IUCDs again can be put, but the problem is they would usually have a larger uterus. The chances of expulsion and migration are higher. Infection rates are higher. So as long as patient can understand that and come for routine follow-up, IUCDs might be better than putting them on a combined ossiples.
Yes, but then catch hold of the husband and first teach him how to use a condom. I think that would be the simplest and the easiest way of contraception.
Yes.
So thank you all very much. I'm sure our panelists has given in a very good input. And next time anybody has an obese patient, at least we know what to do a little bit further. Thank you all very much. And now we will have a short summary of whatever we have gone through so far by Dr. Hema and Dr. Sunita.
Dr. Revati?
Yeah, I'm sharing the screen.
So while the slide gets up, so we have had an elaborate discussion about the complications of obesity in pregnancy. So we have already understood that it's a endocrine problem giving rise to metabolic syndrome, and the problem starts right from the preconceptional stage, goes on up to delivery, and we do have problems faced even in the post-conceptional phase, post-delivery, postpartum area also. So Dr. Hema, can you kindly elaborate the take-home messages?
Good afternoon, everyone. It was a wonderful panel discussion. Hope all got the messages how to handle this obesity and pregnancy. So the preconceptional care is very important here, since obesity and pregnancy is a high risk category, and we can modify the risk factor. We can counsel the patient. This is the ideal time. And folic acid and prenatal vitamins, including vitamin D, is very important. And you have to screen for diabetes, hypertension, and thyroid. And lifestyle modification is very important, because weight loss programs, even if she loses, as the panelists discussed, 25% or 10 to 15% of weight loss, there will be increased fertility. And anti-obesity drugs that cannot be given during pregnancy. So this is ideal time, again, she can start anti-obesity medications pre-pregnancy. And if it is a morbid obesity, more than 40 kg BMI, then yes, bariatric surgery. And we have to discuss about types of surgery and its consequences to both mother and fetus, nutritional deficiency, including anemia and thyroid leading to preeclampsia. So preconceptional care is very important. And then antepartum, I think all discussed spontaneous abortions and screen for congenital anomalies, especially neural tube defect and spina bifida. And we should not forget about the maternal implications of cardiac dysfunction. Most of the obese women will have, cardiac abnormalities like myopathies and myocarditis, etc., and sleep apnea and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Diabetes and preeclampsia, we have discussed. We should not forget about screening that. And for the fetus, yes, again, small for gestational age, IUGR, preterm births, stillbirths, all has to be kept in mind. Then intrapartum, yes, increased cesarean section, failure of induction, all leading to increased, cesarean section rate will be more for this obese patient. We have to individualize anyway, as Dr. Anu discussed, whether it is vaginal or cesarean section, we have to discuss about it. And then yes, subcutaneous drain, I feel it is a good practice point that better to keep subcutaneous drains and sutures and staples. Intermittent suturing or continuous suturing, all is very important. Then wound dehiscence and rupture, that is also more common for the obese women. Apart from that, in the hospital where we have to manage facilities and equipments, it should be large beds and OT table and big BP cuff, and especially long instruments are very important at the time of delivery. Yeah, anesthesia, again, spinal is better, epidural possible, yes, we can. And GA, there will be other technical difficulties, including intubation and other, post anesthesia complications are more common, so better spinal. Postpartum, yes, weight retention, and it's because of that, very difficult to lose weight, so they may have a long-term complications, including development of diabetes, osteoarthritis, etc. But immediate complications like, again, wound infection, early cessation of breast milk, and depression. And thromboprophylaxis in all stages, antepartum, intrapartum, and postpartum, that should not be forgotten. Then contraception. Contraception, we have discussed, again, individualized, whether it is vasectomy or permanent method for a pregnant lady, or any barrier methods as a temporary method, we should not That's all. If any elaborative, please, Dr. Sarita.
Yes, Dr. Hema. I think you have rightly brought out all the take-home messages, and I thank the panelists and the moderator for giving us such a wonderful session. So over
before we
you,
end,
Dr.
I think
Revati.
Dr. Padmaja is there with us. If you can unmute Dr. Padmaja, she's the secretary of ANBI, and Dr. Padmaja may want to give us some comments. Could we unmute Dr. Padmaja, please?
Yes, sir. Working on it, sir.
I think we have to thank ANBI because a lot of ANBI people have joined this program, and this is the second time we are doing with them, and we have been we hope that the students have learned something and gone from these sessions. Is it possible to unmute Dr. Padmaja?
Yeah. Can you hear?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it was wonderful actually. I just want to add one point. Preconceptional counseling we can do, but I feel we should concentrate on the adolescents, because a lot of adolescent obesity is there. So that will pass on to the pregnancy. So I think when the adolescents come, I think from that time we should keep the pregnancy complications in mind, and we should advise them from that point. Actually, we should concentrate on the adolescents. Yeah.
True. That's definitely a good point.
Yes.
That
And,
we need to tackle them as early as possible.
Yes. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I mean, unless we are doing some kind of school programs, unfortunately for obstetrics, most of the time they come with pregnancy, or now at least a few of them are coming prior to pregnancy. So we utilize the best chance that is available to us.
Yeah.
But I think definitely school programs, checking for obesity is a very, very important issue.
And just one more point is IUCD is not actually contraindicated. So maybe intracaesarean IUCD is a good option maybe for them.
Yes, if you are doing a cesarean,
intracaesarean or even postpartum IUCD, post-placental IUCD.
The biggest problem I would see with the IUCD is, the amount of fat on the thighs and the amount of fat
it's actually vaginal delivery
is so much.
Yes.
It's extremely difficult to put in.
And I don't know. I mean, monitoring itself is difficult. So
absolutely,
I think many of us will go for cesarean, but intracaesarean IUCD is a good option for contraception. It was a really wonderful session.
Thank you. And would Shield people like to take over before we conclude the session?
Yes, sir. This is Dr. Prachi from Shield Healthcare. So thank you very much. So before we end, there are a few questions from the doctor. So if you allow me, I will read out.
Sure.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So the first question is vitamin D supplementation is essential in obese antenatal. So your
Hello. Would any of the panelists want to answer, or shall I take the question? Is vitamin D essential in the pre-pregnancy period? Is that the question?
Yes, correct, sir.
Yeah. Now, one thing is this obese patients, whatever few studies that we have, our level of vitamin D is definitely lower in most of these patients. For whatever reason, that work is going on. The second important thing is we know that the vitamin D deficiency results in a lot more pregnancy complications that these obese patients are already prone to. So if I have something which I could correct before I allow pregnancy, it would be much better. So that would be the role of vitamin D supplementation.
So the other question would be how much to supplement, sir, because there is no clear-cut guideline as to how much to supplement. And what we've actually found is most of the literature says even up to 2000 is safe. So if I have a lady who's obese and she has no history of renal stones, and she is otherwise not hypercalcemic,
you'd like to,
and I would check her calcium, I give her 2000 international units as a blanket, sir.
Absolutely.
Right. I'm sorry.
And tablet supplementation, oral supplementation starting from 40 weeks.
So I personally prefer to give them the sachets.
So, but
Okay, you give them one sachet every 3 weeks. And by the time you're treating their infertility or whatever, the vitamin D levels would also be all right.
yes, sir. Periconceptually, that's a good option. But during pregnancy, what is seen is everyday supplementation with orals.
Is important. During pregnancy, everyday supplementation. But the aim should be to correct the vitamin D levels before, because you get those 2-3 months when they come to you in pre-pregnancy period. Try to supplement as much as possible.
So that the cord blood levels increase, sir, with oral supplementation.
Absolutely. Next one, please.
Yes. So the next question is, should we offer early anomaly scan via TVS route, and will that be helpful?
Whether we would want to do a CVS on this patient and go ahead? Is that the question?
TVS, sir. She's asking for transvaginal ultrasound.
Transvaginal ultrasound. Okay. For early anomaly scan.
It's quite difficult.
Who's going to answer this?
Sir,
are you there?
Yes, sir.
Answer.
Yeah, so transvaginal ultrasound is quite difficult to do an anomaly scan. So as a fetus is growing up, to access all the organs through a transvaginal, even if it is early anomaly, is quite difficult. So, but we can add transabdominal plus transvaginal route to see the structures based on the fetal position and what structure we are aiming at. So it has to be a mutual, both transabdominal and vaginal route, not only either one of it, but I prefer both to add additional value to whatever is missing, which we cannot see on transabdominal route.
So obesity is such a situation where you would take help from anybody, anywhere, whatever instrument, whatever you can. Take help. Don't shy away from taking help from anything and anybody.
Right, sir. The next question is, though this has been covered, but I will repeat this question. What are the important investigations in an obese primary in first, second, and third trimester?
Okay, I think we have covered up, but Revati, could you take that question, please?
Yes, sir.
Important investigation in first trimester, second trimester, third trimester.
So in the first trimester, bloods, I would do a CBC, a complete blood count, not just doing a hemoglobin PCV. I would want to look at the platelet. I would want to look at total counts. Because they also have an exaggerated inflammatory response, which can be reflected on the total count as well as ESR. I would also want to look at her thyroids. I would want to do a TSH free T4 because sometimes these patients can be hypothyroid without the TSH showing up greatly, and you could actually pick it up on a free T4. I would always prefer to do a free T4 estimation in these patients. I would want to do a blood sugar check. We would have to check the screening, whether there is hyperglycemia. That is very, very important. I would want to do infection screens. We would want to do a urine routine, a urine culture. I would prefer to do a vaginal swab in these patients because most of these patients have exaggerated white discharges. And as far as scans are concerned, we would want to do a viability scan to establish that the fetal heart is good at beating, and also would want to establish the plurality of pregnancy, if any. I would also want to do a dating scan starting at 8 to 10 weeks. Would want to do an NT scan between say 12.5 to about say 13.5 weeks. Would want to add on the double marker in these patients necessarily because the NT scan may not be all that satisfactory to assess the risk of aneuploidy in these patients. Would look at morphology whenever it is possible, may be difficult, like how Srividya has enumerated. Would want to do an anomaly scan, not as late as 20 weeks, maybe at around 18 weeks to check for defects, very, very important. I would not actually, separate surveillance protocols with investigations because this is about management. So I would want to see these patients at least once in 2 weeks in the second trimester, look at their BPs more frequently, look at, the possibility of worsening hypertension. So that would be in the third trimester. And would want to do an extended anomaly scan, do a fetal echo in these patients because most of these patients are going to be diabetic. So we have to look at a fetal echo somewhere between 22 to 24 weeks. Look at an extended anomaly screen because some of these patients are diabetic. They're going to end up in tracheoesophageal fistula. That's going to trouble you when you deliver the patients. So it is important that you look for the stomach bubble in the extended anomaly scan. And then look at the growths, which is very, very important. That is in the third trimester. I would always add on the uterine artery Dopplers in the second trimester because this does reflect the endothelial dysfunction to some extent. And then in the third trimester, I would want to look at them every week, look at the fetal well-being every week, look at their glycemic control. And most of these patients are going to be on home.
Repeat all the investigations in third trimester, second trimester,
every trimester, and talk to them about a birth plan as once they reach 30 weeks. It should not come as an emergency. Tell them the possible place that you would probably deliver them so that they are mentally tuned to be delivered in a tertiary center, because they have to understand that they can end up in a preterm delivery anytime. Get the anesthetist to meet them, when you're doing a birth plan. Talk to them about an ICU and neonatologist. Keep them well trained so your life becomes less, difficult when you're planning for a delivery. So I think all these basic investigations have to be done every trimester. Counsel them. And as far as the third trimester is concerned, look for polyhydramnios and macrosomia. Adjust the sugars. Look at their BPs more seriously, and watch for preeclampsia. Very, very important.
Okay. I hope that answers the question. The next, please, if there is anything.
Yes, so the next question is, what is the best material for suture material for subcutaneous fat? Is it catgut or Vicryl?
Catgut is never a good material in the sense that, now we don't use catgut for anything, or at least we are not supposed to use catgut for any of the suturing technique. What we need is a suture material that is low in its inflammation. So a Vicryl would be better. Personally, if you ask me, I like to use monocryl. I would use monocryl 2.0 for the fat, and I continue the same suture also onto the skin. Okay, definitely, because catgut will result in more of a seroma. So better to avoid that.
Right, thank you.
And we also find a lot of these patients using proline. So proline is totally outdated. In fact, there is exaggerated tissue response because of use of proline.
Absolutely.
So it is better to use Vicryl only. There is no change. Use the same kind of suture material that you want to use it, but make sure that the subcutaneous fat is well approximated. That's what I would say.
Absolutely. Next
So
one, please.
yes. If the patient is taking on aspirin, then at what gestational age we should be stopping it?
Okay. When would you want to start aspirin for this obese patient as a preventive measure? There's no previous history of preeclampsia or any such thing, right? That is what I think the person would like.
The question is, when will we stop, sir? If the patient is on icosapent already,
when you want to stop?
Yes.
Okay.
1 week prior.
Yeah, who would like to take this question?
So 1 week prior to delivery. Nowadays, they say, you can continue it even up to 36 weeks. There's no harm. I would not say 48 hours.
Yeah, but the only problem is here is a subset of population who are likely to go in for a preterm labor. The chance is very, very high. So personally, I wouldn't allow aspirin to go beyond 34 weeks. Because I don't know when she's going to deliver.
That is acceptable, sir. Most of these patients are going to be on low molecular weight anyways. So I think icosapent will do more harm than good, actually.
Absolutely.
And starting icosapent, I think you should start less than 16 weeks. And there have been guidelines.
Early second trimester, you can start off. Yes, Dr. Prachi?
Yeah, the next question is, what is the dose of metformin in obese women?
Okay. Who would like to take this? Anu?
So whether to start and
continue.
So the first question is whether to start and continue in pregnancy if they were not been on that. So as long as, it is always two schools of thought. Some people don't start, like Dr. Revati. I'm sure she'll not start if they are pregnant and they come without metformin. On the other hand, metformin is supposed to
they're not going to use metformin as a hypoglycemic. We are using metformin to control our weight.
Correct. So the dosage, the maximum dosage would be 2 grams per day, split into 3 or 4 dosage. Whether to continue it or not, if she is hypoglycemically not stable, yes, definitely continue. But the researchers say as long as she has been preconceptionally on metformin for PCOD, then at viability you can stop. As long as baby's heartbeat is seen, we can stop that. And it is not necessary that we need to continue it throughout her pregnancy.
And the problem with metformin is that
metformin is a drug which some consider as an angel and some consider as a devil. In
Yes.
spite of all the arguments, still nothing is still sorted out.
Correct.
Again, my personal opinion, it's absolutely my personal opinion, nothing to do on evidence or anything. From whatever I've had from my practice, I would be hesitant to use metformin. I would be hesitant to use metformin. If hyperglycemia is a question, I would prefer insulin in these obese patients rather than metformin. And if metformin, I'm using it for making sure that she doesn't put on weight. I do not know what are the side effects which could lead to some effects in the fetus. So although literature says that you can use, there are papers that say that you can use. But personally, you can see in my patient, I never used it. But it depends on you. It depends on which side of the spectrum you belong to.
And the
There are people who
pharmacokinetics.
swear by,
It depends
there are
on
people
where
who
you did
swear
your
by
PG
metformin.
from.
So the problem is the pharmacokinetic.
My opinion is only this. Any drug which is not really required should not be used in first trimester, because there are certain drugs which we came to know they were not good even after 20 years or 25 years of use. Number two, we have been very short-sighted. We have been looking only at physical defects. We have not looked at the developmental aspects and the mental aspects of the defects. Now we are waking up to it. So unless I have some solid proof, unless I have some solid evidence that this drug is required for this patient, I would be hesitant to use. Because I can control her weight with a good diet and a wee bit of exercise, instead of giving her metformin at this particular stage.
So the other problem is pharmacokinetics, sir. When you use metformin and at a later stage, when you're not able to control with metformin, the moment you add insulin, these ladies will end up with hypoglycemia.
Absolutely.
Exaggerated hypoglycemia.
Exaggerated hypoglycemia. No, for hyperglycemia, I'm very clear. In an obese patient with hyperglycemia, insulin is the only answer.
If you cannot use
But if
anything,
you're using it for weight gain, it becomes a different cup of tea. There also, I would be hesitant.
Yes. If you cannot use insulin, you at least use metformin.
Yeah, but if you are using it, you will not be totally wrong. You will not be totally wrong, because there are some articles which support its use.
But not very
this would be my personal opinion.
Absolutely.
So one last question. Suppose the patient develops post-op cough. So proline is not a better choice to prevent dehiscence of wound in this patient.
Sorry?
If a post-operative patient develops cough, isn't proline a better suture material to prevent dehiscence than Vicryl or monocryl that we use?
All right. See, the basic principle over here is why do we use proline in these patients? Yes, there are many surgeons also who are very fond of using proline. Now we use proline thinking that because it's a non-absorbable material, it is going to stay there for a longer time. Okay, now we are talking here of a post-operative cough which is coming in 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. Okay, so in 24, 48, 72 hours, my Vicryl is also going to be equally strong. If you are telling of a future hernia after 5 years or after 7 years,
no difference.
There also there is no difference, but there could be some point for argument. But as far as immediate cough is concerned, it doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter. I remember when I was a PG, once upon a time I should say that, we would use, we didn't have any sophisticated techniques in the teaching hospitals at that particular time. So we would use the threads and we would cut the IV tubings into pieces and use those pieces and try to tie the wound, thinking that these two tubing pieces will keep the wound intact. But now we know that the skin is not the most important thing. Fat is not the most important thing. It's the rectus sheath that is most important. And Vicryl will stay strong definitely for the 7 days. It will stay even longer, but for 7 days it is definitely strong. So again, I would say that, well, if you are comfortable with proline, use it. I'm not very comfortable with proline because I'm worried about seromas coming in this patient. So I personally like to use Vicryl.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir. That was the last question from the doctors. So thank you very much. It was an honor to have you on this webinar and the excellent discussion and the panel discussion. I'm really thank you to ANBAI and MFM to organizing this webinar. So thank you very much. So
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. And
Thank you.
Thank
see you maybe next month. Okay.
Thank you, Prachi. Thank you, the entire team of SHIELD.
Thank you,
so much.
Ratima.
Doctor.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you and have a good day and stay safe.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Bye.
Hmm.